Hi everyone, my name's Nina Ellis, Dr. Nina Ellis, and I teach creative writing, English, and comparative literature here at a university in Egypt. I'm here to help you write a novel in 4 months to draft 60,000 words alongside one of my courses this semester. I'm going to be really quick today because I have to go teach, but I thought I'd keep my promise and tell you what we're going to do in our third novel writing class before I go teach. So definitely go ahead and watch classes 1 and 2, which are on my YouTube channel, The Rookie Professor, if you haven't already. Otherwise, what I'm about to say won't make that much sense. So last week, we all introduced our narrators using a saying that narrator heard quite often growing up, mined from our own personal histories and exchanges with other people in the class. And then we let those paragraphs bring the narrator to another character who's going to be the protagonist of each of our novels, just like in The Great Gatsby, who breaks the taboo at the center of the saying. In class 3, we're going to actually start writing our novels, drafting them by hand in the really ugly exercise books that I bought my students in order to encourage them to not be perfectionists. And the first thing I'm going to do after I hand out those exercise books is I'm going to give my students these character information worksheets, and I'll put a little picture on the screen too. Now, these character information worksheets are obviously based on the pattern of characters established by F. Scott Fitzgerald in The Great Gatsby. And something I noticed as I was summarizing who the characters were was that they're all obsessed with something. So in The Great Gatsby, you have Nick Carraway, the narrator, who's obsessed with Jay Gatsby, the protagonist. Jay Gatsby, the protagonist, is obsessed with Daisy Buchanan, his lost love. Daisy Buchanan doesn't have so obvious an obsession, although she certainly holds a flame for Jay Gatsby. Tom Buchanan, despite himself, is obsessed with Myrtle Wilson, his secret lover. And then you have the character of Jordan Baker, who's more minor, but who I think is important, who is a sort of maybe love interest slash ally for Nick Carraway. And I don't think she's really obsessed with anything. She plays golf, but she cheats, and I'm not sure that it's a real obsession of hers. I mention this just to emphasize the fact that obsession will be a central part of your novels as well, because you'll be modeling them on Fitzgerald's pattern, and of my novel too, since I'm doing these exercises along with you. So the first thing I'm going to ask my students to do is to fill in this bit under my characters' names. The narrator, I'm going to ask them to give their narrator a name, like Nick Carraway, but obviously not Nick Carraway. And then A is the protagonist who the narrator is obsessed with, Jay Gatsby. I'll ask them to name their protagonist. And then beneath that, I'll ask them to just look through this pattern of characters' relationships that they're going to develop over the course of their novels, modeled on Fitzgerald. So you have N with A. N is interested in working out A's history. Meanwhile, A will ask N for help. N is obviously Carraway. A is Gatsby. A with B, so that's Jay Gatsby with Daisy Buchanan. A past relationship that was cut short. A, Gatsby, asks N, Carraway, to introduce them. And in your novel, obviously your A's and N's will be different, but I'm asking you to kind of follow that general pattern. It doesn't have to be romantic obsession. It doesn't have to be the same kind of obsession. Your Daisy and Tom characters, for instance, don't need to be married. They could be siblings. It could be a different kind of love. But there's a general sort of web of dynamics there that I want to create in our novels too. Then B with C, exactly. They're a couple or a pair of some kind. C is the obstacle to A and B getting together. So C, obviously, in Gatsby is Tom Buchanan, but might be a different pattern in your novel. N, Nick Carraway with C, Tom Buchanan. C thinks they're friends, but N secretly dislikes C. N, Nick Carraway with D, Jordan Baker. The beginning of a romantic relationship. Also, D, Jordan Baker, helps N, narrator, Nick Carraway, meet A, Jay Gatsby. I mean, I'm not sure that it is really a romantic relationship. And then C with E, so that's Tom Buchanan with Myrtle Wilson in Gatsby, a relationship C keeps secret from B, Daisy Buchanan, who would disapprove. But it doesn't need to be an affair. It could be something else. So I'll talk them through all that and have them name their narrator and their protagonist. And then after that, we're going to read the first 4 pages of The Great Gatsby. In this version that I have, which is the Penguin Modern Classics version bought in the UK, that takes us from page 5, beginning in my younger and more vulnerable years, up to the top of page 8, that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. And it follows not only the opening that we discussed in classes 1 and 2, but a passage in which Nick Carraway tells us about his personal history and what brings him to the setting and the time during which the novel takes place. So, for example, my family have been prominent, well-to-do people in this middle western city for 3 generations. The Carraways are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that we're descended from the Dukes of Buccleuch, But the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, sent a substitute to the Civil War, and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. Blah, blah, blah. And he tells the history of his family. And then he ends up saying that he decides to move east after World War I instead of going back home. Father agreed to finance me for a year, and after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 1922. And then he describes that the practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I'd just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. And he explains how he came to rent the house, which we'll later discover is next door to Gatsby's. And then there's that wonderful ending to this passage. And so, with the sunshine and the great bursts of leaves growing on the trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. I really need to run off to teach, but what I will then ask my students to do, after they've had a look at their character sheet map and we've read that opening passage of The Great Gatsby, we'll ask them to first discuss with their partner the narrator's history for their novels, just to refine their ideas, and then to go ahead and write that opening. And their homework will be to finish it, the first 2,000 words of their novel, which should include a saying that the narrator grew up with, that they were formed by, an account of how that saying formed them, a mention of a protagonist who broke the taboo at the center of that saying, who's going to be at the center of the novel, a family history of the narrator, followed by an account of the life events that brought them to the moment at which we begin the story, which is going to be near the moment when they first hear about the protagonist. And that should come, as I say, to 2,000 words, written by hand in a hideous notebook without perfectionism. And I'll tell you what we do next in our next class, Class 4. See you then, and in the meantime, please feel free to follow me on social media, Substack, and YouTube. Bye!